Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to an episode of the Artenders with Mac and Dan. I am Dan, he is Mac.
Howdy.
We are revisiting a wonderful piece of media that perhaps you never heard.
Maybe perfect piece of media.
Wow. Okay,
I'm kidding.
but in terms of heard, yes, so we did an episode on this movie. It was actually a very first episode, but unfortunately it had to go down because of quality assurance. You know, we were QA testing per se. And so this was actually officially our first released episode, but because it went down, we felt the need, or at least I felt the need, to put it back into the rotation again. And also, it's still a fantastic movie, and it's up there in terms of one of my favorite movies, and I think it's safe to say also that it's up there for Mac, one of his favorite movies as well. And this movie is a film that was released in the year 2000, and
oh my god, the reference! I loved it.
And it was a movie by the name of Remember the Titans. It is a movie that takes place in 1971 about a high school in Alexandria that was just integrated with white individuals and black individuals. It is directed by Boaz Yakin, written by Gregory Allen Howard, and starring Denzel Washington. And it is one of, if not the, but we could have a discussion about that later on, the quintessential football film.
Yes, easily.
Now, I haven't seen every football film. I haven't seen... I
don't think anyone has.
And, well, perhaps, sure. I think there's a
that's someone's life goal.
But now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, I kind of want to watch, like, every baseball movie. Like, just to see.
That'd be fun. That'd be a fun day.
But, like, I think it's either between this or maybe the original Longest Yard or maybe Rudy as well.
Wow,
so, Which I haven't... I've only seen pieces of the Longest Yard. Different. And I have not seen Rudy, right? So, like, I am limited in terms of this conversation. But, like, this is a magical movie. But, Mac, before we get into my thoughts, I want to hear your thoughts. So, we watched this movie separately but together last year. And and before that, like, we hadn't seen the movie in a long time. But now, like, we were only a year off from the last time we viewed this movie. So what were your thoughts on this movie, watching it again this year, only a few days ago that you watched it? And what were your impressions? How do you feel it aged? Was there anything new that you picked up on? Just anything that you are feeling to talk about in the context of having watched it last year? Feel free to let me know.
Danny, fine wine.
Oh.
Fine wine.
Are you implicating that it has aged akin to fine wine?
I am implying indeed that it has aged akin to fine wine. Yes. So it I gotta say, you know, if you wait to open up a bottle of a beautiful red wine after 20 years, it'll be just as delicious, if not more so, 21 years later.
Yeah, and, like, delicious in a different way. Like, you're going to get a slightly different flavor notes as well. Yeah. And I think we both had that experience as well. Yeah. We got different flavor notes that we are going to get into later on in the podcast. But, yes, I agree with that note.
So I got to say, though, that the thing that kept ringing in my head that I remembered thinking last time that I did think again this time is this. It is one of the best lessons that I have gotten as a director or writer in terms of playing to your audience. Not necessarily the audience that is expected, but trying your hardest to play to the audience that needs the message the most.
Right.
We talked about it a little bit last year with actually a couple different things. We talked about it with I think we talked about it with John Coltrane a little bit.
Sure.
That one of the most challenging parts of being an artist is the idea that you want to make art that maybe changes people's minds. So how are you going to get a message in front of someone that already disagrees with that message?
Yeah.
You know? And I think that Remember the Titans does such a stellar job of that. That it is not a sports movie. It is a movie about race that has chosen the vessel of sports.
Right. It's through that context, through that lens.
Exactly.
And what's so beautiful about this movie as well is it's through the unification of sports.
Right. Exactly. But if you think about who are the average people that are watching sports movies in America?
Typically, probably, white people,
White dads.
people. Yeah, especially, yeah.
Like older, probably in that age range.
Yeah.
Probably white.
But like
probably
families
middle
too,
class.
considering that this is a Disney movie or produced by Disney,
Yes.
right? So that's another consideration to have.
So
definitely kids as well, but yeah.
Right, but if you're trying to make a movie that goes straight to the white folks, about race, I'm serious, about race, I think it's pretty clever to make it Disney and to make it a sports movie.
Yeah.
And hell, even to make it Denzel Washington. Like, these are all very, very accessible things for white people to latch onto. In the same way, in the same way that...
Especially that it's like football, you know?
Exactly, exactly.
And we're not trying to implicate that this is a
white
movie for white people.
Right, it's
right,
not.
right. It's
It's
not. It's just like, it just happens to be that like majority of like the demographic that's going to view this movie more than likely, I think it's relatively safe to say that it's mostly going to be white people, yeah. Exactly.
Especially whenever it came out in the year 2000.
Yes.
Yeah, that was exactly the audience that was going to pick that up. And I think that's very clever. I think that's very, very good marketing, but also like planning and storytelling.
Right.
That you are making this message for an audience that you think needs to hear it and going straight to them. I think it can be kind of similar to one of my favorite examples of this recently was Knives Out. That Knives Out, at face value, looks like, again, it's not actually, but it looks like a white movie.
Yeah.
It looks like a whole bunch of old white actors with a white director and writer.
Especially considering that it's a whodunit, which is
It's a whodunit.
Such a great example of like senior citizen level of like storytelling. Which let's just get out there that whodunits are the best, but
they are fantastic.
A different conversation for a different day.
We will get there though. But that even your lead that is from a different country, the only not white person in the cast, is still very white looking.
Yeah.
Like very Eurocentric features facially. Yeah. As well as they are in the back of the poster despite the fact that they're the lead.
Yeah.
Because they're not the most famous person. All these things kind of play into the fact that it is at face value more of a white movie that at the very end gives you a very subtle and very interesting hint of racial message. Yeah. That it talks about immigration in a very interesting way, and that kind of it gets slipped in at the end without it hitting you over the head. In the same way that Remember the Titans kind of very subtly spoon feeds you a message while,
I would not say subtly.
Keep you comfortable. Okay, sure.
Subtly is being disingenuous to the film. That I love this film. But of course it's going to. It knocks you over the head of hey, racism, dumb as shit. It's ridiculous.
You're right.
And it's absurd that we let it. First of all, be an issue in the 60s and 70s, and for well over a century before that, as well as let's also consider the fact of let's look it through the lens of why was this movie made? Now, I don't know the specific context about the year 1999, 1998, and what was going on there, especially considering that we were born during that time, right? And we don't know the height of that sort of thing, but there's a need for sometimes stories to be told, and I would like to believe that at the very least, Gregory Allen Howard felt the need of I want to tell this story. Also based on a true story, let's not forget that. I want to tell this story because I think it's a story that needs to be told. Now, why it needs to be told? Maybe because it needs to be preserved, but it needs to be preserved because sometimes as a human race, we do things in a cyclical manner. I love bringing this up. We talked about cycles a lot when we reviewed The Wire, that essentially how a season started and how a season ended was in the same place. Also knowing that the characters changed radically, but functionally as a system, nothing really changed overall.
Yeah.
And so there's a sort of need to showcase this movie and this story when humans, we just tend to do that we tend to regress back to our old ways, our old habits. And so in order to prevent that, hey, look where we were, and we need to be better than this now. And what's really, really aided by the fact of just like, first of all, it's a good movie, right? That we can sit here and we can really say to ourselves, man, this movie is trying its best to do something good, but it's a bad movie. Nobody wants to watch this. You don't, regardless of what message a movie has or what something is trying to do, you don't want to watch something that's bad.
Right.
That, and excuse my crassness, it fucking sucks.
No, yeah.
I wouldn't want to do that. I remember a friend of mine, a couple of years ago or something, was watching a bad TV show because the bad TV show was predominantly Hispanic characters. And I was very confused, and I'm allowed to say this because I'm also Hispanic, and I was very confused. I was like, but you shouldn't support bad work. I understand the need to like support something that like you want to be a part of because you're Hispanic as well, and like you want to like support these voices per se, but like you shouldn't be supporting bad work because then the expectation is just bad work. And so when we are making art that's regarding racial division, we shouldn't be supporting bad work. And it makes me so fucking happy that we have watched a movie once again that is about the sport of football, which is like a fun sport, and of course it has its issues with the NFL, but the issues with the NFL and not the sport. But then also, like, it's a movie about racial division that's good, and it's great. And even though it's campy in a few parts, I mean, even though maybe a few jokes don't land, what really supports this movie, and really he puts it on his back and he does an amazing job, and I wouldn't want to see anybody else perform in his role, is of course Denzel Washington.
Yeah.
And Denzel Washington becoming a household name after 8 years prior in '92 with his movie Malcolm X, and just showcasing his absolutely brilliant work. And then even though I'm happy this movie exists, I'm happy the script exists, but the script and the dialogue is nothing too impressive. But there's a way to the execution that Denzel provides, and it makes you sit there and really think to yourself, I wouldn't trust anybody else with this. Here's the best example.
Yeah, please.
In the sort of first act of the film, right before they go to the training camp, right? The entirety of the football team and the staff.
Yeah.
There's a moment where Gary Bertier and Ray Buds, I believe his name is, go up to Coach Boone, who was played by Denzel. It's like, hey, this is what's going to happen. We already figured out this team. You don't need to worry about anything. If you want to screw around with offense, fine. But defense, that's perfectly fine. You don't need to mess with it. Just keep our boys playing. Our boys being, you know, the white guys, and screw all the black guys.
Yeah.
We got this. Don't worry about it. And so the dialogue after that, the dialogue that Denzel says, not that impressive. That he says, oh, so you look like Gary. You look like Jerry Lewis, and your buddy right here is Dean Martin. Jerry, you tell all the jokes, and Dean, you pick up all the ladies. And then he steps back, and he's like, ladies and gentlemen, Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin, and then he starts clapping, right? And then it becomes a slow clap, and then he says to Gary, no, I run this team, and where's your mom? Points out his mom. Okay, that's your mom, but like, you know, I'm the father of this team, and then steps into this like very much so lower, intimidating, and disturbing tone of just like, so who's your daddy? Like who's, you know, it depends on me whether or not you're gonna play. So who's your daddy? And then Gary admits to saying, "You're my daddy," and I wouldn't trust any other actor with that, because so much of that dialogue is a trap. It's so easy to make it super duper contrived, and in a way it was, but like, I believe that moment because it's fucking Denzel Washington.
Sure.
And
Do
so,
you think it's the fact that it's Denzel Washington, or do you think it's the what he does specifically to it?
I think it's a combination of like the fact that it's Denzel Washington, of the fact of just like he is so alive in that moment that he's just committing 100% to what's going on, but it's not being too absurd. It's still, there's such a great focus on the objective that he has in hand, which is, no, I'm the one that wears the pants, and I'm going to beat you with the belt. as well. And that's a consistent theme and motif that his character visits throughout the movie and is brought up to his character throughout the movie as well. That he, I mean, not literally, but figuratively, beats others with the belt.
Yeah. Have you ever seen Training Day?
So I haven't seen Training Day in a very long time. I know it was released after this one. I know that Denzel Washington is a corrupt cop, and I know that is another, like, sort of statuesque performance of Denzel's.
In my mind, that's the best Denzel performance.
Yeah.
That's where Denzel's, like, becomes ethereal.
But it's like, what we're seeing here is this sort of, like, infant version of Training Day where, like, no, I'm going to control every situation. Every situation is mine. And there's this confidence that he acts and plays throughout that, like, no, and I know it's mine.
Yeah.
I don't have to work for it because I have it. And because... Let's also look at the context of he is a football coach for a high school that loves football, right? That football is their bread and butter, right? So if he has to work for that power in front of everybody, then he's lost that power.
Yeah.
But if he goes into situations sort of looking like, no, I have the power. I am the one in the room that holds the crown, and it's not heavy on my head, period. Then we're just like, okay, we believe it. All right, you're here. Okay, then you are captain, easily. And then, like, it convinces Gary in that scene that as much as he doesn't want to listen, he's like, shit, I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. I have to follow with what he wants. And, like, part of that is, of course, also how Coach Boone is written, that Coach Boone is always going to try to have the power in the room. But I think it's just the perfect casting to have Denzel be that role. And then when you get those scenes outside of him being a coach, it's like this, like, interesting bit of humanity of, like, oh, that's right, like, you're a person too, you have feelings and emotions as well, but you just can't show it to others because they can undercut you, you know?
Yeah.
And that's also what makes his relationship with Will Patton's character, Coach Bill Yost, so interesting as well, is that even though Boone always has the power, there's still this power dynamic that, like, Yost isn't purposefully trying to get at Boone, but because of how the two work, they're always at ends with one another because of just how different they both manage the team. And so it's this wonderful, beautiful thing of, like, I respect you and you respect me, but if one of us tries to cut each other's legs off, then, like, I'll bite back. It's a wonderful exploration that, once again, I don't want to see anybody else play that role, and perhaps somebody else could have, but it's so perfect. It's so perfect. And I'm not here saying, like, this is Denzel's best role. And I'm not here saying, like, this is the best role performed on screen. No, not at all. But it's so well suited for what this movie is trying to do. It's a treat through and through.
There's a question that I want to ask you.
Okay.
Kind of in the same ballpark. But I will ask it afterwards from our sponsor.
Whoa!
All right, if you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Now, just let me explain. First of all, it's free. Second of all, Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and a whole bunch more. And third, now this is really important, you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Hear me when I say no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Hola, welcome back to the Art. We got to keep that right. Okay, good. Hola, welcome back to the Artenders with Mac and Dan. So, we left off with a question from last. This is the question that I have for you, Mr. Daniel Arturo Lavelle.
Okay.
Where does Remember the Titans rank on all-time sports movies?
Well, I think it's up there. I mean, but, like, in terms of, like, the sports movies that I've seen.
Yeah. No, I don't mean football. I mean sports.
Right. So it's never going to be my, first of all-time favorite movie and therefore all-time favorite sports movie as well, Field of Dreams. It's a hard one to beat, right?
Do you accept that that's not objectively the best movie of all time?
Unfortunately.
Good. Okay.
As much as it breaks my heart to say it.
But that is something that's just in your heart.
Yes.
Good.
And so I haven't seen every single sports movie, but I've seen enough to feel safe to say, yes, if you made a top 10 and potentially top 5 sports movies of all time, remember the Titans is part of that list. And what's really nice about this movie as well, I don't think we touched on it too much, but like, or we did a little bit, but it's this sort of campy nature, right? The dialogue is not perfect, and some of it feels contrived, and all of a sudden, they're singing a song by the Temptations. That feels a little bit forced because, like, nobody is really committing to it fully in terms of the acting either. But, you know what? I'm having a great time, and I'm still really emotionally invested in this movie because at the same time, maybe the dialogue isn't that great, but the overall story and the structure is really well done. And the pacing, we have not talked about the pacing in this movie.
Oh, true.
I think the pacing in this movie is incredible, and alongside the message of what the movie's trying to say, it's trying to say something. It's not trying to just put itself out there. It's a combination of true story. We want the story to be told, and we need this story to be told.
Danny, what makes good pacing, and how does this movie accomplish that?
I think when you realize good pacing, when emotional moments occur during the movie, and you're like, and you feel it. You feel the emotional impact, and you see the growth of characters, and you see, okay, so Will Patton, his Bill Yost in the first act is different in the second act, is different in the third act, and it's a combination of like relationships grow. Things happen plot-wise in the story, and it's a very fine line, and it's a balancing act, and it's difficult to describe and really look at like good pacing and bad pacing, but to me it's sort of like clear when it's just like, okay, the movie is over, and I have had a full experience. I have felt the highs, I have felt the lows, and they happen at appropriate times. And so, like, for example, I accidentally kicked the desk because I'm an amateur. For example, there is and this is a very easy example to reach, but there is like one of those like Google year in reviews videos that I saw.
Yes.
That one of them, I think it was like 2018 or 2019, that at the very beginning laid it on thick with like the heavy nature and the heavy sadness, and I'm like, holy shit, I just started this video, like, oh my god, like, let's just ease into it a little bit more. Like, can we just like start with something just like easier, right? Like, nobody wants to like start right there, and if this movie started right there, then it's like, right? And this movie doesn't really.
Like they have to go to camp before they go to school.
Yes.
And that's a very important like evolution in the movie.
Yes, exactly. And then like, so allowing these characters to start with a kind of, but I can't really find the term, a blank slate, and then growing together, right? So it's a combination of growing, and they're growing together. And then they reach this peak moment together where like, we have reached the upper echelon of greatness with one another, with our relationship. We are fantastic with one another. Best example is with Campbell and Bertier, right? And so like, we're good buds now. Now, all of a sudden, there's something that separates them. And this is a common structure through a lot of movies. That, like, by the end of the second act, and I'm using air quotes, second act of a film, sorry, let me go backwards, because I tend to start stories in the middle, which is just the biggest fault of mine. At the end of the first act...
You think that's the number one fault of yours? I'm sorry, go ahead.
At the end of the first act, like, maybe, like, the main character relationship is at its peak, right? But then somewhere in the second act, or at the very end of the second act, it gets lost. And then part of the third act is them rebuilding it back together, and it becomes stronger. That happens in this movie as well. And so you get a complete pacing, and not complete pacing, but a complete story of, like, camp, and then growing like in high school, and then growing like as a team. Once again. And those feel like very complete, separate, but whole stories.
Yeah.
While you're still getting development with Boone, with Yost, with Campbell, with Bertier. And then all the side characters as well, that it never feels like too much is going on at once.
Yeah.
That once it feels like, okay, so we've gotten enough about Petey, right? Okay, now we're going to introduce Sunshine as well. And then slowly integrate him into the film.
And that's an excellent writer thing.
Yeah.
That's something that happened in planning months before they even started shooting. That was a stellar decision to be made. As well as that's a very good way of talking about race issues. That if you are going to tackle something as tricky as race, or the way that races cooperate and interact with each other, you do have to do it first on an individual level, and then on a group level, and then on a community level. Yeah, and that's exactly what the movie does.
That's exactly it.
Which is very clever,
and it's never too close together, and it's never too far apart.
Right, and that's what the story's going for, and it does it well. I think.
Yeah. And then there are hills and valleys like throughout that journey as well.
Ain't no mountains high enough. Ain't no valley low enough.
And ain't no river wide enough, baby.
Right.
Yeah, to keep me from coming to you. I want to also get into our sizzle serve, or into my sizzle serve at the very least. And this is a really spicy one, and I just realized as well I'm not the greatest teammate, so I'm just gonna tease you. I'm gonna tease you with this sizzle serve, and you're just gonna have to live with this tease until it comes back to bite you. So where does this rank for you, as well as like all-time great sports movies? Is this number one? Is this top 5? Is it top 10? Is it just not even in the question, not even part of the conversation? Where do you feel this movie? And this is of course classic radio talk of like, let's rank. That's exciting.
Yeah, right.
But honestly, because like this movie is a part of our childhood, and it's a fundamental part, and part of it is nostalgia. But like as we get farther away from childhood, and as we watch this movie again a year later, we're a little bit farther removed from nostalgia. So now, just looking at it in the context of now, in the context of your current eyes, where does this rank for you?
I think without nostalgia, it is. I think it is maybe second place on. Maybe third place on all-time sports movies. Yeah. Because I do. There are some sports movies that are specifically like autobiographical or about a specific person, and getting to see their entire life and how they affected sports is, I think, a really solid way of approaching a sports movie. So, like, for instance, I think that Hoosiers. It's a fantastic sports movie that just hits home every time. I also think that another big one that is very rarely talked about, which is a shame, is The Express, about Ernie Davis.
Yeah.
Who like came into I think Syracuse after Jim Brown. Like one of the first black football players in like the 30s and 40s. Yeah. And that was a really, really, really good movie because he, like, it's about his life and that, like, all of his hardships and everything, and how he was, like, one of the best football players of all time, or the best football player of all time by the time, like, whenever he was playing. And then he wasn't even able to go into the NFL. He got drafted and then died before he was able to get on the field from bone cancer. And real story. And, like, as you are watching the movie, it's just so expertly crafted because the second that you get payoff, the second that, like, because every sports movie is the same, you work really hard and then you finally win the game.
I've never seen a sports movie without payoff.
Right.
But in the sense of like I've never seen a sports movie that purposefully did not give you payoff.
Exactly.
There's always some feel good in there.
Exactly. And this movie was so expertly made because everything was the exact same as a sports movie. It felt like a regular ass sports movie. And it was kind of boring almost for a lot of it. And then exactly where you expect for the win to go, exactly where you expect for him getting drafted goes, or like the fade out and then he went on to do this and this and this narration at the end where that's supposed to go, he gets sick, starts coughing up blood, and then he dies. And it hits. It really, really hits. And I think that is, like, it's technically a sports movie, but what's so awesome about it is that it uses the sports movie format to trick and elevate. Yeah. Trick the audience and elevate its story. As more than a sports movie, similar to Remember the Titans. Right. But Remember the Titans, if we're factoring nostalgia, is for sure number one. Right. This is just the movie that, maybe with the exception of accidentally Transformers, which just came on FX all the time, I gotta say, it's true though, right? Every time that you nailed it. You nailed it. Every time you put my FX.
Yes, you were correct.
That's the Transformers channel.
Oh my god.
Maybe with the exception of that, by accident, I gotta say that I definitely watch Remember the Titans more than any other movie in my lifetime. Yeah. Partially because of my dad, partially because of my brothers. It's just a really safe movie that we know that we're gonna like every time we watch it. Yeah. And so just like wait a month or two, pop it back on. It's easy. It's easy to digest every time.
It's fun, and you find something new, or at least I found something new here and there.
Yeah.
Each time.
Yeah.
That, like, I paid a lot more attention this time when I was watching it to the relationship between Boone and Yost. Yeah. Like, last time when we watched it, I paid particular attention to Ray Buds, which is, like, the white football player that is always racist. Like, he never changes. Yeah. But, like, paying attention to him because I was like, how is he acting in scenes? Like, how is his character going through scenes when it's, like, the football team's coming together, but, like, does he want to be a part of that? And so, like, I was keeping an eye out for him, but then in this watch, I was like, oh, this power dynamic between Boone and Yost is so fascinating, and so much of it is subtextual. Yeah. That, like, once again, like, the dialogue that is said isn't that impressive, but the dialogue that isn't said is all the more interesting and all the more fascinating. Like, I can't think of, like, many quotes in this movie or many quotes that I'm like, yeah, this movie. But, like, I think about scenes that had Boone and Yost together, and it's just them two, and it's like this, like, delicate game of chess where it's like, once again, they respect each other, but it's like, I want to win. You know, and not just, like, win in the context of, like, this football team, but, like, I also kind of want to win in this relationship, not because I dislike you, but because, like, I deserve to be here, and I earned being here.
Right, right.
And so, because they were both in, like, a similar position, there was, like, this, like, animosity is a very strong term, but, like, this, like, sort of butting heads relationship where, like, race wasn't really a factor, but it naturally was because they were just both different races and just like where they came from and who's supporting them. And
in that way, to be blunt, which we all know I'm probably going to be, I always am, with this watch for me, I think the big distinction is that this might be the first watch that I really appreciated and paid attention to the white people.
Yeah.
Like,
I noticed, too, how much focus there was on the white people as well. I was like, wow. And kind of it is an issue where I'm just like, we know a lot about Bertier's life, and, like, we get his mom and his girlfriend and, like, his home life, right?
Yeah, but
we get nothing on Campbell.
Yeah.
We get nothing on Campbell.
Right, right. And the funny thing is that growing up, maybe this is because of Denzel Washington, I'm not sure, though. I really only gave a shit about most about the black players. Yeah. Like, it wasn't like I watched Bertier or Bill Yost or whatever and identified with them and was like, yes, me. I see me in that character. I didn't really care. I was there more for the fun of the movie and the fun of the scenes. Yeah. Which 100% of the time, that's mean. 90% of the time came from Denzel Washington. Yeah. Or Wood Harris. Right. But yeah, and so this time I think I actually allowed myself to try and get invested and actually pay attention to the other actors in the scene outside of Campbell and
Bertier. Yeah. Because, like, that's the relationship that the movie wants you to focus on.
Yeah.
And that is the perfect segue into my sizzle serve, where I don't believe Campbell and Bertier's relationship
That is a sizzle serve.
And let me explain.
That is a sizzle serve. Okay.
And so, growing up, I always did, right? And I think that's because of how the movie is written.
Uh-huh.
And I think it's because of the individual actors. I think Wood Harris, we saw him extensively in The Wire, and he was great in The Wire. And it's also funny because he was like 30 in this movie playing a 17-year-old. And it was also funny watching The Wire. I was like, you can't be Dee's uncle. You're only like in your 20s. No, he was like into his 30s and like it made sense logistically. But so that was like a weird experience for me. But
Remember the Titans ruined The Wire for you.
Yes. Yes. Put it in print. And then I also enjoyed Ryan Hurst's performance as Gary Bertier as well. And I think they do good jobs on an individual level. Yeah. And I think individually, that's true. Do we get enough Campbell and his like home life, his life? No. But like as characters, I think they're both written pretty well. And in terms of growth and in terms of the relationship that they explore together. But I never got the sense of chemistry between Wood Harris and Ryan Hurst. I never believed that relationship on screen. I believed it because of how that relationship was written, and I believed it because of like where that relationship started and how much time and patience and love this movie took with that relationship, and especially with the individual acting. For example, when Gary is paralyzed by like not being that great of a driver, and so a truck hits him, and then when Julius Campbell finds out that he's paralyzed, that individual acting scene is a really impactful one because you believe in that moment like he is his friend. And then when Julius Campbell walks into the into the room that they're holding Bertier, and Bertier says to the nurse, it's my brother, ma'am, like, can't you see the resemblance? And then, like, also, for some reason, I never picked this up before, but, like, how Bertier also raises the fist, like, in solidarity with him. I don't know, I didn't notice that before, but then I finally did. I'm like, oh my god, like, that enhances the moment so much more when Bertier really wanted that poster taken down from the Olympics in the 60s. But when they're connecting with one another on a scene-by-scene basis, like when they're sitting, and it's very small, but in this context, when they're sitting on the bus together on the way to camp, when at camp they're having that conversation of like, I don't want to know you and you don't want to know me, and so like, why don't you be a captain, etc., etc. Like, I believe that they're acting truthfully, like in that moment as themselves, and then later on in the movie when it's like left side, strong side, left side, strong side. I don't believe that like that wire between them. That like sometimes I like to visualize the image of scene partners, right? That it doesn't matter the physical distance between them, but always they have this like red hot wire between them, and they're both like pulling it, and there's like not pulling it, but there's this like intensity, so that this wire is always tight. It's never loose, never slacked. It's always a very tight, thin line of a wire, right? There's hardly any bumps in it, and I never got that sense in between those two. That I always felt like that's really good acting on an individual level. That's really good acting on an individual level, but like you two are not like listening to one another. Sure, you're not responding to one another. You're not responding to what the other person is giving you. So I found myself like, I still enjoy this relationship, but this relationship, and maybe part of it is nostalgia of, this isn't what I remember. I remember this relationship being a lot stronger, but it was like, oh, like it's written well and it's acted well on an individual basis, but you guys aren't listening to one another and listening to what the other person's giving you.
How much of listening in film do you think is the editor or the videographer and as opposed to the actor?
I mean, sometimes listening is goddamn impossible in film because like sometimes you're just not acting to your scene partner. You're acting to nothingness or just something pointing out where their eyes are supposed to be. Like it's so difficult. We don't like generally like we don't talk about that enough. And so, but still, like, we have to consider it an indictment when the performance isn't where it needs to be. Like, we have to, because that's the final product, and that's what we're seeing, right? But we also still have to consider that context and consider the fact, hey, this shit is hard, doubly so when you don't have somebody there that you're actively responding to, that in theater we take for granted.
Yeah, true. And I'm definitely not trying to like make an excuse for the performances that we saw in Remember the Titans, but the first thing that I think of is, man, it would be really helpful if we could just like inject acting theory into editors and, you know what I mean, and videographers.
Yeah. Well, can you speak on that a little bit more?
Yeah, because for instance, this only pops in my mind because recently, I watched a showcase. I watched the TCU showcase.
Okay.
For like their senior actors, and I remember seeing the scenes or knowing the performers. I knew that it was a certain way in person.
Right.
That it simply did not seem the same at all whenever it was on camera, and that's because it was only shot from 3 different cameras. And so a lot of the time, there was like a scene between these 2 people, and one of them got a lot of screen time. Mm-hmm. And it would linger on them after the line was over and things like that. And the other person just didn't get as much screen time, flat out. Despite the fact that person was listening very well. And I think the fact that person was listening told the editor that they were not the one that we should be watching right now, because they're not the one being active or being action-packed enough.
I mean, can you imagine like watching a scene between 2 people, but like the shots that you're getting are just the person listening? Like, that's not... You wouldn't... Typically, you wouldn't want to watch that.
Right.
Because that's not the active goings-ons of the scene.
Yeah,
Even though they're being active, but they're certainly not being as active as their partner who's actively speaking.
But a lot of the times, especially in a scene that has subtext,
right,
it feels very awkward or clunky or maybe even impossible for us to actually buy into a character whose decision or whose change happens in the silence. Or happens in the listening. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like if I fully change tactics, but it's not on the line, or it's while you're talking,
right,
it can be very clear in theater.
Sure, because everything is on stage in front of you and you can just move your head.
Yeah.
But you need a director for that.
Right.
You need a director who knows what's going on in the script and with the actors.
Right. Yeah, and in film, again, it's possible, but it needs someone that understands tactics like that, understands listening and beat shifts and like basics, but still like acting theory nonetheless. That I wish everyone got. And a lot of people have like a natural inclination to it, or like they as long as they're paying attention and being aware enough that they can get by with that. That's what I see a lot of. Is for instance, Steven Spielberg. I don't know if you've ever seen Steven Spielberg direct, or like videos of him directing or whatever.
I have not.
I know. I didn't imply that you have been on a Steven Spielberg set. No.
I also like the idea of like how it was phrased to me. Like, have you seen a Steven Spielberg movie? And it's
no.
I mean, yes, but like I was like, oh, that's a weird accusation.
No. Like him directing on set.
I have not.
It's funny because he knows a lot about film and a lot about directing and writing, and not a whole lot about anything else. Like he doesn't know a whole lot about actors or what actors are supposed to do.
Sure.
Or theory or theater. And so, which he doesn't have to necessarily, but it's interesting because he really does get by just, by talking to them in a common sense sort of way. And like this is the story I'm trying to tell kind of way. You do the rest.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, us as actors and most actors are trained to and are expected to do that work on their own. So, like, you get something and you should be able to translate it into something that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it would be very helpful if, whoever you're working with was accustomed to that.
Yeah.
Like a Greta Gerwig. Mm-hmm. Greta Gerwig is a fantastic on-set director.
Yeah.
Like, if you ever see a video of her, I'd highly recommend it. Watching videos of her directing scenes as they're happening, because she knows that a lot of the audio that they're going to get is ADR after the fact, and so she will be talking out loud to the actors as they are side coaching, as they are mid-scene. And not just like, do this, like not barking direction at them,
Right.
but actually side coaching them.
Yeah.
And it is massively effective, especially if you see movies like Lady Bird where she's working with younger actors that need side coaching. It works.
Yeah. And that's also like a common, for those of you who don't know, that's a common technique / practice for, before I go on, let's just say hi, Dakota.
Hi, Coda.
And so that's a common practice for a lot of theatrical acting professors / teachers, that they will side coach you during scenes. It's this like omniscient voice that's like out of the way, and like sometimes if they're good, it's not as distracting as you would think.
Yeah,
it would be.
Yeah.
And so that's a very common thing. And so I think in the case of this film, I think it's, if we were to speculate, I'm just getting that out on the front end. Yeah, I think Boaz Keane like put a lot of faith in his actors, and sometimes like maybe like that faith shouldn't have been there because the actors sometimes weren't there, you know. But then when you have somebody like Denzel Washington that's on screen, instantly he makes everybody around him better, because how can you not respond to that?
Yeah.
So it's just it's good and it's bad sometimes, and then so much of it then, of course, in the case of Steven Spielberg as well, depends on the casting. So like Bridge of Spies is a fantastic movie, partially because it's Tom Hanks and Mark Rylance.
Yeah.
And because those two are just brilliant.
God, Mark Rylance.
They have the Midas touch.
They do.
And same thing as Denzel Washington in this movie, that he has the Midas touch. And so then when you get those scenes with Will Patton, that's like, oh my God, wait, these scenes are a lot more electric than I ever gave them credit for. Let's start to wrap up this bad boy. I just want to throw in there as well an honorary gold medal, because a year ago we didn't do gold medals either, and so gold medal is to somebody, maybe it could not just be an actor, but it could be a director or a writer or just anybody involved with the project.
Is yours an actor?
Yes, mine's an actor,
okay.
And it's going to be Hayden Panetta.
I was about to say fucking Hayden Panetta.
Cheryl Yost, yeah, because it's not common for you to see a 9.5-year-old actor act their ass off.
Yeah.
And she does a great job, and you believe every moment, and she helps really strengthen the audience's relationship then with her father in the movie, Bill Yost.
Yep.
And it provides a lot more of this human side, and also she's this fantastic comic relief, and it's a shame because the daughter's name is escaping me, but the individual, the girl who played Herman Boone's daughter, it's so clear that Hayden Panettiere is a better actor. Because just like, I believe everything that you're doing, and I don't believe anything that you're doing.
Yeah, right.
Which is fine because they're kids.
Yeah, right.
But it makes it so much more of a treat when like, oh, you're a kid who's doing a fantastic job. This is great to watch.
Yeah.
So, Mac, any closing thoughts on this classic from 21 years ago?
Again, fine wine. It's it's just if you've seen it before, feel free to watch it again, because it does keep bringing new things to the table. I highly recommend showing it to anyone of any age. Literally, one of the very few movies that I really can't think of a person that wouldn't enjoy this movie. Your grandma, your grandpa, as well as your little cousin. Everyone would like this movie if they gave it a chance.
This is a lovely film. It is. I agree. It has aged like the finest of wines. Of course, still like a little bit campy here, and I think that's like to be expected. And like, and not every sports movie can be perfect because it focuses so heavily on something that is not intrinsic to the story itself per se.
Yeah.
And so like you're gonna get these montages, and sometimes it's difficult to have stories within these montages, but outside of that, I think this movie is still great overall. I think the acting is strong, and I think the storytelling is strong. Just like it's like it is like a quintessential like B+/A- movie. Like it's that. Like you can tell its flaws, you can see its flaws.
Yeah.
But with that, you still have a great time because of what it's doing and how it's doing it.
Yeah.
It's an absolute treat, an absolute joy, one of the best sports movies of all time. And if you haven't watched it, why haven't you?
How dare you?
Why haven't you? I mean, not
Truly.
even how dare you. It's just like, come on, man, or woman, or just they them.
Baby.
Just yeah, come on, baby. Ain't no mountain high enough. But seriously, like this is a great movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
And who knows? We may review it again a year from now.
Oh, who knows? That'd be cute. So,
Mac? Yes.
no, yeah, go ahead.
No, I just stepped on everything that you were trying to do. What were you gonna say? Because I'm.
Well, I was going to lead into the next. Exactly what you're about to do. Lead into the next episode.
Wow, we really just like stumbled at the finish line, huh?
Yeah, I mean, maybe 20, 30 seconds.
Yeah, and
to
then
like,
we have our like ass crack showing. It's like, oh god, and we're
and now the basking in it, I think, is just as good.
Yeah, and everybody's watching. Yeah,
Listening?
that too. No, but I'm saying in the context of like this finish line analogy.
Wow,
And now we're in last place. Mac, what are we going to review next time?
Crush the transition, crush the analogy.
And hit the mic to
Hit
really
the mic as
cap it off.
Coda, you want to chime in? Okay. For our next episode. This was the last episode of season 1.
Yeah.
Of the Artenders.
Of year 1. Yes.
Year 1 of the Artenders. Crazy. Mind-boggling. So, our very first episode of season 2, year 2, is going to be my number 1 favorite movie.
Wow.
Number 1 favorite movie. I'll tell you why it is, and we'll get your takes on it whenever we get there, and it is Parasite. You stressed?
I'm so stressed.
Good.
I'm like excited but terrified.
That's it. That's exactly the fucking movie we're talking about. Okay. Thank you guys so much, and we'll catch you next time.
Oh god.